we have breakfast. But then we have breakfast with Tony Doucette. It's not an auction prize today. It's actually a real thing for us. We appreciate that. And we want to thank you for being such a great friend of the club and helping us out fast with auctions. So that was a pleasure. Well, after a broadcast odyssey that began 46 years ago at a 500-watt coffee pot in Halifax, Nova Scotia, our guest speaker today has now joined the ranks of the retired. You'll be in good company in here today. Yeah, right. Having hang up his headphones and shutting off his microphone for, I guess, a couple of months, maybe a little bit more than that now. His last post was as a morning host of CBC Radio Windsor, and we certainly miss his friendly and very distinctive voice, in addition to his curiosity, his wit, and the intellect that he brought to the job. Prior to serving Windsor and the surrounding counties on CBC Radio, you might remember him on the sports desk of CBC television. His long media career earned him many awards and highlights, notably his coverage of the 1992 Olympic Games in Barcelona, Spain. What a thrill. The World Cup of Soccer and the championship runs of both the Detroit Red Wings and the Detroit Pistons, and 3 Memorial Cups for our Windsor Spitfires. Sadly, he held out hopes and vowed not to retire until his beloved Toronto Maple Leafs won the cup. But he could not defy Father Time. But he did try. Is it Army Rat or Army Brat? It's one of those anyway. Rat? Rat. Oh, okay.
That could be a matter of perspective.
Okay. Well, maybe rat because you were born on Groundhog's Day. That's a rodent thing. But he was raised mostly in Gagetown, New Brunswick, which is the home to Ellie's son, and other maritime locations where he spent his youth. Young Tony got the media bug, moving up and down the dial until he landed in Windsor in 1984. This is quite a while ago. Married for 42 years to Alma. Together they have 2 daughters, Jessie, a physiotherapist at Hotel Dieu Grace Healthcare, and the mother of his 5-month grandson, Jack. Congratulations. Daughter Jamie is a captain in the Royal Canadian Air Force, and she is stationed in Winnipeg. We are thrilled to introduce our guest speaker this morning. Please give a warm welcome to Tony Doucette.
Thank you, John. Thank you to the honorable member from Dresden.
Yeah.
With the invitation. Congratulations on Arden Park. We were coming out on Saturday while friends were going in. And I said, how did you like it? And I said, there could have been no vendors in there at all. And I would have absolutely loved it. It was such a treat just being out in the crowd. So that was terrific. And as far as the screwdrivers go, the difference between a Phillips and a Robertson, if someone asks me if I'm handy, I say, yeah, I live right over there. I often say my wife doesn't like me messing with her power tools. A lot of people think that's a joke, but I can assure you she has skills that she picked up from her father. My dad was not a do-it-yourselfer. Anyway, I often tell people that because I've been in Windsor for so long now that I wasn't born in Windsor. I got here as quickly as I could, which is really not true. Because I go back to the time I was working in St. John, New Brunswick at the time. I was a morning radio sportscaster. And the producer of a program then called Morning Watch here in Windsor called me and asked me if I'd be interested in coming to Windsor to work. And I didn't know a lot about Windsor. What I did know about Windsor was that it was across the river from Detroit. And the reason that I knew that was because I was somewhat aware of Canadian geography and North American geography. But in the Maritimes, for some reason, I still don't clearly understand, on our cable television service, the local American stations that we got, for some reason, were channels 2, 4, and 7 in Detroit. Oh. And the time zones had people like Bill Bonds and Mort Krim and those guys coming on at 7 in the evening Atlantic time. And as you all know, as many of you certainly know, that in the 1970s and early 1980s, Detroit wasn't a really great town. Happily, it's a much greater town than it was then. But we used to watch the 7 o'clock news from Detroit for entertainment purposes. I'm being quite serious when I say that. What's burning, how many dead, and under what circumstances. So when I was offered the opportunity to come to Windsor, I said, I don't want to request that. So I declined to even apply for the job. And then about a week later, the head of English radio sports for the CBC, named Alan Clark, who Bruce will remember, called me and encouraged me to apply. And I thought, if I don't apply, then it's virtually career suicide, obviously, because it shows that I'm not interested in moving along. So I applied. Came to Windsor in March of that year to do an interview aboard, as the CBC called it. And I was not a savvy traveler at all. All of my toiletries and everything were in my bag, which in Canada promptly lost. And I was staying at the hotel at the tunnel entrance, at the corner of 11 Park. And I don't remember what it was called then. And I had an interview at 9 o'clock the following morning at the CBC radio station, which was then at the security building. And so I had toothpaste, I had nothing. I hadn't changed clothes. So I thought, okay, well, we'll just look at the best of the bad situation here. So I got up the following morning. I called the front desk and they offered me what they could. And I had a 2-block walk, 2 or 3, from there to the security building. And being a maritimer, and it's nothing that I really practice consciously, but I grew up experiencing the idea that if you made eye contact with someone, you said hello. It's just habit. All of my friends did it, all my family did it. And so it was not at all unusual for me in meeting someone on the sidewalk on that 2-block walk over the security building to say hello to people. And I think I may have said hello to, I'm guessing, it was 8:30 in the morning, so the sidewalks were busy, 15, 20 people. And I got 15 or 20 hellos back. And I thought, man, I could live here. That was my really positive first impression of Windsor. And that was the morning after Bob Probert was caught with a substance in his underwear at the Detroit end of the tunnel. And that was one of the first questions I was asked in the interview. So how do you handle this story if you were to work for us? And I said, well, I suppose you start with the obvious. You try to contact Probert. And then, of course, you work out from there. Anyway, I managed to do well enough in that interview to get the job, which was really terrific. And what followed was just a wonderful career that allowed me the opportunity to change what I did on a number of occasions. It was radio sports for the first several years. And then, Bruce, if you don't mind, I'm going to drag Bruce into the anecdote here. In 1990, they took our local television newscast off the air. And in 1994, they returned it to the air. I was doing radio sports at the time. And Bruce, who was a manager at the time, approached me and said, would you be interested in doing television? I don't know, man. I'm pretty self-conscious. He encouraged me to give it a go, and I did. And not more than a matter of weeks after that, the radio sports job and every radio sports job across the country were eliminated. He won't admit it, out of modesty, but I think he saved my job. And I tell everybody this story. So there began 12 years of television sports. And there was a fair bit of media coverage of that first show that went on the air in 1994. Ted Shaw was the entertainment reporter at the Windsor-St at the time. And he described me in the story the following day as looking like a deer in headlights. Which I took no issue with whatsoever, because it was really damned accurate. I looked back at the tape, I just, terrified, absolutely terrified. But I grew into the job, and after 12 years of doing that, the morning radio position opened. And radio, 12 years of television demonstrated to me that my first love was radio. Television and radio are really, they're related, but really not closely at all. And I always like to use the stuff bunny analogy in explaining the difference between the two. I often get a chance to talk to kids, school kids, high school kids, even college, university students about the business. And I always ask them to imagine the stuffed rabbit when that perhaps you had as a child. It knew this too. Stuffed rabbit that was pink when it was new, with ears that were erect and a nice little fluffy tail, and a couple of button eyes, a little, when you shake it, the little black things kind of roll around. And over the years, the pink has turned to somewhat gray. There's a little tear in the bum where the tail is, and the stuffing is starting to fall out. Ears is flopping over. The eyes are still there, but one of them is hanging by a thread. So you can picture that. Right? That's radio. Television, all I do is hold up the rabbit. And so radio is a real medium for storytelling. I like to think of journalism as a 5-cent word for storytelling. There's certainly a discipline that goes with it that saves us all from being sued. But over and above that, it's the ability to tell a story, which I'm somewhat proud that I was able to do for so many years. We all have friends who can take a really good joke and just embellish it to the point where you're on your hands and knees with laughter. And we also know people who take the best joke ever written and just ruin it. The former is the storytelling. We figured that by the time I retired, Tom Addison, who was the technician associate producer in Windsor Morning, still has that job. In fact, just before I retired, he came up with a rough estimate that over the 16 years I hosted the show, I probably did about 20,000 live interviews. And before I retired, he said, "Is there a particular favorite?" Well, there are a couple for a couple of different reasons. And the first one was at the University of Windsor, they had an artificial intelligence conference. And the keynote speaker for that conference was booked to come into the studio for an interview at 10 after 7 the following morning. So I get in there at 4:30 in the morning, up at 3:45, into the office at 4:30, and I have a rundown of the morning's stories and whatnot on a computer, but I have hard copies as well. And I look down and I see the keynote speaker, a fellow by the name of Dan Silver, who's the head of the department of computer science at Acadia University in Wolfen. So he was going to be interviewed at 10 after 7, so he's there for 7 o'clock. Our World Report is a 10-minute newscast that offers him the chance to come into the studio and to chat him up for 10 minutes to make him as comfortable as I reasonably can in 10 minutes. So he sits down and I look at him and I said, "Are you from Canning?" Which is a really small town in the Annapolis Valley, Nova Scotia, near where my wife was born. And he said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am." And I said, "Is your mom named Dora?" And then he kind of said, "Yeah." And I said, "And Charlie is your dad? You like father, Charlie?" Yeah. And then he really doesn't know what's going on. I said, "You and I are cousins. I haven't seen you since you were 8 years old." His mom was my grandfather's sister. And the last time I saw him up to that point, my uncle, who's 3 years older than me, we were shooting pop bottles off a fence post in my grandfather's backyard in rural Nova Scotia with a 22 caliber rifle. Oh, wow. And Dan and his parents pulled into the driveway, and my uncle says, "Oh, we got to put the rifle away, the wieners here." He was an only child, and he was very protected. Turned out to be a wonderful fellow, I have to say. That was the worst interview I have ever done, because we were both so damn distracted. He was just flabbergasted. I had a bit of an advantage over him, and that I hadn't really a suspicion who he was, but he was just, I knocked his message so far off the track. The other one of my favorites for a very different reason is fellow that, he was a Windsor police officer at the time. He and his wife, in fact, were both constables with the Windsor Police Service, and he was a longtime member of the Scottish Regiment Party. Was that very, very well. He's now a town councilor on the south, fellow by the name of Mike Apata. And Mike and I are really good friends. I moved into his neighborhood about 20 years ago. And as a reservist, he didn't have to go to Afghanistan, but he had trained as an infantry soldier for so many years and never got a chance to test his training. So he decided, well, he's going to volunteer to go to Afghanistan. He and Sherry, his wife, had 2 small children at the time. And of course, she was concerned. His mother forbade him from going, which isn't good luck with that. So off he went. And the neighbors were tying yellow ribbons around trees and everything else. And so when he came back, I invited him into the studio for an interview. I'm going to get emotional about this because every time I think about it, I think about what he went through. He was there for 6 months. And I asked him on the air, and anytime anyone even halted or got emotional on the air, our producer, Robin Brown, says, be careful, because if they lose it, you're going to lose it. I just know you're going to lose it. So he talked about what he remembered from being there, about the fact that he felt guilty washing his car because there was so little water. They had to carry water with them wherever they went. It was desperately hot. They wore 45 to 50 pounds of gear all the time in 90-degree heat with a 80% humidity. But he said the thing that he remembers most is the ramp ceremonies. Even though he was only there for 6 months, he was there for the death of 13 Canadian soldiers. And he's talking about the ramp ceremony, where everybody's lined up. The tail of the Hercules transport aircraft is down. And pallbearers, here I go, they're carrying the casket. And there's the lone piper. And he said, the thing that God never failed to get him was the sound of the boots on the ramp. Soldiers. He said, just couldn't get it out of his head. That was my other favorite. Anyway, those are the 2 interviews I really treasured for, as you can see, entirely different reasons. There was Shelley Atkins, John Atkins, senior constable John Atkinson's wife, who a month after he was killed, decided that she wanted to come on the air and thank him for the support. That's all I could do to keep it together. Emotion, my daughters do that. My wife knows that. She said she's been victimized by it. So anyway, that is, I mean, I could go on and on about any number of things. About the '92 Olympics in Barcelona, watching Mark Tewksbury win a gold medal and going 100-meter backstroke, and actually calling that race live on the air. Watching Mark McCoy win a gold medal for Canada on 110-meter hurdles was amazing. Sitting 3 rows behind the Brazilian judge who screwed up silly Frechette scoring in the synchronized swimming compulsories. You may remember that. And watching this woman loudly tapping her touchpad and not quite figuring out what was going on, and then learning afterward that she had entered an incorrect score. And Sylvie Frechette eventually got her gold medal. It was many years later. Prior to the opening ceremony, CTV had broadcast rights to those Olympic Games. We didn't. So we only sent 3 radio reporters. I was one of them. So we did not have access to the opening ceremony. But we figured, okay, there are 3 of us, and there are 8 entrances to the stadium. If all 3 of us try 8 times to sneak in, perhaps one of us will succeed. As I'm walking around outside the stadium, just going through, people were shoulder to shoulder everywhere. My cell phone goes off. Then was the size of that coffee mug. And it rings, and I hear this breathy voice. It says, "The Eagle has landed." And it was Mary Hines who managed to make it inside the stadium. So that was good. So Mel Roitman and I, who were also covering, didn't have to worry about getting in. So I just walked around outside the stadium. trying to do a color story, as we called it at the time. And I see this guy with a big red foam maple leaf on his head, this big, and it kind of strapped him here. And I walked up to him and I said, would you mind doing a brief interview? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I looked at him and I said, do I know you? And he said, yeah, I think you do. It's Jim Kennedy, who's from Windsor. With his, and he was there on his honeymoon with his Irish wife, who had a big green foam shamrock. Anyway, all of this sort of came to a conclusion, career-wise, on the 31st of March, which was my last working day. Somewhat appropriately, some would tell you the first full day of my retirement was April Fool's Day. People ask me how it's going, and in fact, I said to Bruce earlier this morning, had I known it was this, but I would have done it when I was 25. I had hoped to work another year. I don't mind admitting that 2 years of talking about it, other than COVID-19, was really stressful. The human body is not designed to get up in the middle of the night. Circadian rhythms dictate that one shouldn't get out of bed at 2:45 in the morning, which I did for the last 16 years of my career. There's no such thing in the broadcasting business as a 9-to-5 job. They just don't exist. So I was fortunate enough that I had a regular gig for all of the years that I had it. I thoroughly loved the work. I often told the kids that I had a chance to talk to that in the 46 years that I did it, there wasn't a single day that I got out of bed and didn't go to work. Not one. Until about 6 months ago, when I felt pretty damn tired. So when I had the opportunity to retire, my wife and I looked at the numbers, some more power tools. And yeah, knows the difference between the Robertson and a flathead. And we agreed that it was time to go. It was an easy decision, but it was a difficult process. That period between 6 and 8:30 every morning, I miss terribly. There's a certain excitement and a certain thrill that comes with turning on the live microphone. That I first did that in Halifax when I was 18 years old. Graduated from high school when I was 17. I had a late birthday because of particular brilliance. A product of when I was born. I'm a February baby, Groundhog Day, as John mentioned. So by the time I got to grade 1, I had almost a full year on some of my classmates. So I went from grade 1 to grade 3. Graduated from high school when I was 17, grade 12. New Brunswickers could never figure out this grade 13 thing. Are they slow or what?
I agree with you.
There you go.
It's a football grade.
So anyway, at 17, I was completely unprepared to do anything of a post-secondary nature. My father was a career corporal in the Army. His wife left him when I was 13, and my brother was 14, and my sister was 10. My dad, I don't like admitting, rest his soul, struggled with alcoholism, as many members of the military did in those days. It was part of the culture. But my mom had had enough of it when I was 13, so she left. By the time I graduated from high school, we didn't have a whole lot of money. So I went to work at a furniture factory in my hometown. Those kind of love seats and chairs, sofas and stuff with these pneumatic nail guns. I did that long enough to know I didn't want to do it anymore. And I was at the Woolworth store in the mall in my hometown. A guy by the name of Bert Green. Try to picture Bert Green, 6'5", who, when he grabs you to shake your hand, gets you right up to here. But Bert had a lisp, and it's, well, I didn't mean to belittle his speech impediment. But he was a grade 12 math teacher at Windsor-St High School. He didn't teach me, but he knew who I was because of several things I did, both good and bad. When I was in high school. So I'm coming up at the Woolworth store, and there's Bert. He said, Mr. Doucette, how are you? So, good. He said, what are you doing with yourself now? Anyway?
Oh my God.
I said, well, you know, I'm working at the Sweden Furniture Factory. He said, how's that going? I said, quite frankly, Bert, I hate it. I need something. Through high school, I was one of these guys who, for no apparent reason, enjoyed oral communication. I liked writing and making speeches, and I don't mind saying I was pretty good at it. I was the best in my high school and the best in the region, which included Fredericton and high schools in that area. And Bert knew that. And I used to host variety shows whenever we had variety shows in our high school. I would end up being the master of ceremonies. And he said, listen, I got this brother that runs broadcasting from Halifax. And he said, I think you should give that a go. And I said, well, I hadn't given any thought whatsoever. So he said, I'm going to give Rick a call and I'll get back to you. Give me your phone. So he wrote my phone number down. And a week later, he calls me and he said, you're going to get a phone call from my brother, Rick. Okay. Not more than an hour later, the phone rings and it's Rick. Rick Green, who, when I was growing up in Oromocto, New Brunswick, where CFP, huge town is, there were two radio stations. There's the CBC and the CFMB, which is a 50,000 watt AM station with an afternoon disc jockey who called himself the Jolly Green Giant. And that was Rick Green. And I thought, oh my God, this is Rick Green. He moved on from CFMB. He said, how would you like to come to Halifax and radio sort of delivery even on phone and give this a go. And he said, Bert speaks highly. I said, okay. He arranged for an audition at CBC Radio in Fredericton. I went in there, sat down in the studio. They gave me a number of pages. They gave me some things to read. They gave me a list of names, names and places that they asked me to pronounce. They wanted to get some measure of how aware I was of current events, of politics and things like that, so that they could figure out what's a total lost cause. They wouldn't invite me, of course. So I did well enough on that Rick called me back a couple of weeks later and said, we'd like you to come down and enter the course. This was October of 1976. And so away I went. And that's where the career began. The way the thing worked was, and it was back in the olden days, when the Canada Employment Center was called the Canada Manpower Center, they had what was called a training grant. They would actually, if you're out of school for a year, they would pay you to go to school. It was modest. I think it was $60 a week. But that's the arrangement that I went to Halifax on. And then I got my first job in May of the following year. It was a one-year course, or if you found work, then you would consider it graduated. Went to Newcastle, New Brunswick. I was 19 years old. Worked 62 days in a row. Hated every freaking minute of it. Only because I was 19 and the station overlooked the town circle. And here I was looking out the studio window at the town circle, and all of these guys are driving their Corvettes, their father's Corvettes, and Trans Ams around the circle while I was sweating it out in this radio studio. So I called Rick Green and I said, Rick, you got to get me out. So he did, and he got me another job in Amherst, Nova Scotia, where I met and married Helen. Worked for 4 years, and then to Fredericton from there, then to St. John, then to Windsor. And it's been a how much time do I have? I only have 10 minutes left, right? Is that about it? So
Maybe a fellow miss, right?
yeah, well, listen, and I would love to deal with any questions you might have in a couple minutes from now. If anybody has a question, I'd be more than happy.
Do you listen to the show now?
Yes, yeah. It's difficult for me to listen to any broadcaster with an ear that is not a little bit critical.
Right.
But I really like the hire that they made to replace him. I think he's doing a great job and I like him a lot. He reached out to me during the application process. We spent about 2 hours in a Zoom call. So he showed a lot of initiative. And interestingly enough, he's from Brampton. He has a master's degree in economics. He's got a real background in broadcasting. But my daughter did an undergraduate degree in human kinetics at the University of Windsor, and then a master's degree in physio at Western. But in any event, one of her best friends in undergrad is a woman by the name of Amelie, who's from Brampton, who grew up with Matt, who is the guy who replaced me. So there's actually a connection. So, yeah, of
Good.
course. So, yeah, absolutely.
I still do too. I miss you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question. I was looking at your bio information. And it said that you've got a new grandson who's 5 months old, 6 months old.
Yeah.
The timing is rather unique that that's when your retirement was. Did that factor in your decision?
No, it really didn't, but there's a lot of really great things that happened. Jack's birth, and he's the best looking human on the planet. I don't care. The family joke is, he's so cute that he has more than his fair share. Some poor kid's ugly because he's so cute. So Jack was born on the 16th of January. COVID eased, springtime arrived. So it's just a whole bunch of coincidences.
That didn't factor in your decision.
Not at all.
Tony, it's my pleasure to thank you for coming. You've made us very comfortable here talking to us, and your personality comes through. Your interviews have always been top drawer. Your relationship with people always been noticeable, and that made you successful. So thank you for coming and sharing your bit of your life with us. We enjoyed you on the air and in person.
Thank you, Artie, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.